Hitchhiking, especially alone, is always risky. But when a young couple with a small child stops to hitch a ride, it's hard to imagine that this trip will lead instead of a destination to an unimaginable hell. Colleen Stan, in her 20s, considered herself an experienced hitchhiker. In the 1970s, hitchhiking was a common practice. Sometimes it was even someone's only way to get around. Of course, she had heard about different cases. Sometimes the stories were so frightening that Colleen told herself it would be the last time. Had she known that her story would become, without exaggeration, one of the most shocking before. The girl had always had good luck, and most importantly, a rule about not getting into a car with the first driver she saw. Colleen drove mostly with older couples and women. On May 19, 1977, Colleen Stan was voting on the road. She wanted to surprise a friend and visit her for her birthday in a neighboring state. Thus, she had to drive from her hometown of Eugene, Oregon, to Red Bluff in Northern California, more than 550 kilometers. She had already turned down 2 drivers, carefully choosing whose traveling companion to be. In the third car that stopped was a young couple with a small child. They seemed very friendly and said they would be happy to drive her to Red Bluff. When Colleen got into the car, her traveling companions introduced themselves. The driver turned out to be 23-year-old Cameron Hooker. Sitting next to him was his 19-year-old wife Janice and their young daughter. Along the way, they stopped at a gas station to get gas and use the restroom. Cameron Hooker was born on November 5, 1953 in Alturas, California. Former classmates and teachers remembered him as a happy-go-lucky kid, a fun-loving and outgoing kid who loved to prank other students. Sometimes his jokes were quite cruel, but children are often not known for their high empathy. The Hooker family settled in Red Bluff in 1969. During this time, Cameron's personality underwent a marked change. He became withdrawn and avoided social activities. That wasn't surprising either. Cameron was by no means the first teenager to go through such a withdrawn phase. No traumatizing incidents were found in his life. When Cameron met his future wife, Janice, his attraction to sadism began to manifest itself. Janice was only 15 years old when she met 19-year-old Cameron. The guy seemed so mature. By then, he was already working at a lumber mill. The teenage girl felt insecure and admitted that she was delighted that a guy who was older than her was showing interest in her. Janice fell in love, she said, with the tall, slender, and handsome Cameron. She herself admitted that in order to keep him, she was willing to do anything. One day Cameron asked if he could hang her from a tree with leather handcuffs. He said he had done it before with his other girlfriends, and everyone liked it. Young Janice agreed. The experience scared the girl badly, but Cameron was so affectionate and attentive afterward that he was able to make amends and allay any fears. Cameron Hooker and Janice were married in 1975. The sadomasochistic acts expanded to include hitting, choking, and scuba diving. Cameron once nearly killed his young wife. Janice gave birth to a daughter in 1976, and she was indeed happy in that marriage. The first girl to fall victim to this terrible compromise was 18-year-old hitchhiker Mary Elizabeth Spanhake. She moved to California from Cleveland, Ohio in late 1975. She lived with her fiancé and worked part-time as a model. She was only 19 years old when she was spotted by Cameron and Janice walking down Mangrove Avenue. The girl was clearly in a hurry to get somewhere, and the couple offered to give her a ride too. Marley's agreed. They drove to Reland Boulevard. As the girl started to get out of the car, Cameron grabbed her wrist and pulled her back in, pulling out a knife. He told her to ride along with them. They brought the captive to their home and dragged her into the basement. Cameron tortured more lies and then strangled her. They buried her body near a state park in their hometown. Despite what happened, Janice stayed with her husband. More lies agreed to be a new slave. The road was long and monotonous. The conversations gradually became silent. The car suddenly turned into a secluded wooded area. Before Colleen could realize it, Cameron was in the backseat next to her, holding a knife to her throat. He placed a special wooden box he had made himself, weighing 9 pounds, over her head. The head box he designed blocked sound and light. They did not make it to their home at night. Over the next few hours, Colleen was subjected to the most severe torture. Cameron, obsessed with his repulsive desires, had concocted a veritable torture chamber in the basement of his home as agreed upon by his wife. He could not rape his victim. Over time, the agreement changed, and Cameron began to incorporate rape into his forms of torture. The day after all the abuse, Cameron put the girl in a wooden box resembling a coffin. Sometimes she was in this box for up to 23 hours a day. She would only get out of there when Cameron wanted to continue his abuse. Every time the lid of the box was opened, Colleen experienced a very strange mixture of feelings. She had a hard time breathing inside and was given almost no water despite the high temperature inside that coffin. She was also not allowed to eat. She was afraid that her captors would also wall her up in this box forever. So when she heard the sounds of the lock opening, she felt relief at first, which was quickly replaced by terror. Her knees shook, blood pounding in her temples. She didn't know what to expect today. The search for Colleen did not begin until 4 days later thanks to friends in Eugene. The parents were sure their daughter was in California, and the friend did not even know that Colleen was coming to her, as it was a surprise for her. The search was complicated by the long distance the girl was missing. Moreover, there are several routes from Eugene to Red Bluff. Nothing could be established at that time. At the Hooker family home, everything at first glance went on as that of an ordinary young family. Janice babysat their young daughter, and Cameron went to work. But only after work he regularly took Colleen to the basement. So went months of unbearable existence, torture with a changing coffin for almost a day, hunger, constant humiliation, lack of clothes. In early 1978, Cameron told Colleen that he was a member of a satanic organization called the Company. The influential, ruthless gang that followed her home and family was still traceable to this day. Of course, it was all fiction, just to intimidate even more, to subjugate the victim. Cameron made Colleen sign a document stating that she would become his slave forever. According to the contract, she is obligated to provide her entire being to her slave master's every desire. If she broke the slave contract or escaped, the company would find her. Colleen's name was changed to Kay, and she was forced to call Cameron Master. She was not allowed to drink, eat, or speak without permission. Cameron fantasized that Colleen was the female heroine of a French erotic novel that was published in 1954, a story of one of his favorite books. In May 1978, the Hooker family and their prisoner arrived in a large mobile home with an outhouse and yard. Cameron constructed a new wooden crate for Colleen. It was ventilated and was built into the bottom of the couple's bed. This was not done by accident. Cameron wanted Colleen to be involved in every detail of the couple's personal life. In 1978, Janice gave birth to their second daughter on this bed, while Colleen was underneath it. After a year of living in a wooden coffin, daily torture and intimidation by the company and her master, the girl was already so malleable that Cameron felt he could trust his slave. She was now free to walk around the house. She was finally allowed to wear clothes and eat normally. Colleen took care of the household chores, helping Janice care for the children. The Hooker daughters saw her as a nanny. Colleen never denied it. In the evenings, she would go into her drawer. The children, naturally, didn't know about it. They didn't know where she slept or what was happening to her. On later nights, Colleen was even allowed to go outside. The neighbors were also sure that Colleen was the nanny at the Hooker home. Colleen never asked them or anyone else for help. Being in front of open doors, she never thought of running away. She had access to a phone at all times. She was very afraid to even imagine what the company would do to her. As punishment for running away one day, Cameron tells Colleen that he is planning something really grand. He wants to create a slave dungeon where many girls will be kept. Now Colleen was helping to dig him a hole, in a place hidden from the neighbors. In 1980, Cameron allowed Colleen to call Colleen at home. He said that the company was listening to this call. The girl must not complain. tell them where she was, and of course, ask for help. Talked on with her little sister Bonnie. Bonnie was so amazed, she started asking her sister questions. Colleen assured her sister that she was doing fine. She asked her not to look for her and not to go anywhere. After this call, Colleen's family did not go to the police. They decided that the girl had become part of a religious cult, and it was her decision. Her parents were not close to their daughter. She often ran away from them on her hitchhiking trips. Despite her very young age, she had already disappeared for quite long periods of time. Not that long, though. The family believed in their relationship. At that moment, the parents believed that their daughter and Michael, such a pseudonym invented by Cameron, are in a cult. Cameron so intimidated his victim and realized it that he was not afraid to leave Colleen and her family for 24 hours. He said he had an important meeting and would pick her up tomorrow. The sisters said that they and the parents were afraid to pressure Colleen, to question and convince her of anything, lest they push her further away. She was just beginning to make contact with them. They didn't want to risk losing her at all. Michael promised his parents before he left that they would have a home soon, and he would let them know the address. For the last time, the parents even took a photo of the fake couple looking just as fake happy. When the girl left, they again did nothing about it. After this visit, Colleen's life became even worse, if such a thing can be imagined at all. Cameron began to worry that he had given her too much freedom, so he immediately locked her in a drawer. She was forbidden to move around the house again. Colleen was kept in this makeshift coffin all day long. It was especially hard in the summer when it was very stuffy and hot despite the ventilation. Cameron tortured her when the children went to bed, so a couple more years passed. For 2 whole years, she didn't even see sunlight in her wooden box. In 1983, Cameron once again allowed Colleen to roam freely around the house and even the yard. Neighbors and children were sure she was back. Cameron softened his attitude toward the victim. After some time, he told Janice that Colleen would live in the house as a second wife. A little later, Colleen was even able, with Cameron's permission, to get a job at the motel as a maid. Now the girl was working, seeing the neighbors all the time. She was in contact with a lot of people, but no one knew about the terrible story. In the same year, Janice became interested in Christianity. She read the Bible, began to pray. She knew Colleen was very devout, and when Cameron was at work, they spent their free time reading the Bible together. That's how they became close. Cameron, recognizing this, began letting Colleen and Janice go to church on Sundays. Colleen saw Janice's heart opening up to her. After another year, Janice decided that she would help Colleen escape. Some believe it was jealousy. Janice loved her husband very much, with her lovesick love, and didn't want him to have a second wife. But judging from the following events, it was her faith that made her do this, whatever it was. On August 9, 1984, Janice told Colleen that there was no company, that no one was coming for her. Janice asked Colleen not to tell anyone what had happened to her. The woman hoped that if Colleen left their home, Cameron would also become a normal person. Collins began to experience Stockholm Syndrome. Yes, she was intimidated, but when she found out the company was gone, she gave Cameron a chance to mend his ways. She even called him from the bus stop, told him she was leaving. He cried. She called him a lot at first. It sounds unbelievable, but that's how Stockholm Syndrome manifests itself. The victim becomes attached to his tormentor, inquires about his fate, asks for either a lenient sentence or no punishment at all, visits him in detention centers, and so on. In any case, Colleen did not say anything to anyone. She came home after 7 long years spent in endless agony. She just came back without answering any questions, and no one would have ever known about it until the following happened. Janice had hoped that she and her husband would finally live a normal life, but her plan never seemed destined to come true. Cameron dreamed of a dungeon with prisoners, a new torture chamber. Janice never told him what made her do it, but it seems that after all these years, her conscience has awakened. On November 8, 1984, Janice asked her pastor if she could confess. Frank Dabney, the pastor of the church, noticed that Jenny was very nervous. What he then heard was unimaginable to him. He said it should be reported to the police, and they did so. Together 4 days after these events, the police contacted Colleen. Colleen acted so calm that the police at first didn't even believe the story, thinking Janice was a crazy person trying to cheat on her husband, probably because of cheating or something. Cameron Hooker was taken into custody after all. The scary story was later confirmed. An incredible amount of evidence was found. There were various torture devices, photos of Colleen being tortured, hundreds of BDSM magazines. Janice also told about the kidnapping, torture, and murder of Mary Elizabeth Spanhake. Authorities were never able to find her remains. Cameron was only charged in the Colleen Stan case. Janice Hooker testified against her husband in exchange for complete immunity. Cameron did not plead guilty. The torturer's lawyer argued that everything was consensual. They were a couple, traveling to Colleen's parents. All the surrounding people saw more than once the girl on the street without him. She would voluntarily come home after work. The prosecutor showed a contract signed by Colleen which proved that the girl did not belong to herself. After Colleen's own testimony, people in the courtroom were crying. Some jurors couldn't sleep after the heinous details the girl had to recount. But Cameron's lawyer had another trump card up his sleeve. It was Colleen's love letters to Cameron. Colleen had never told anyone about them before. She wrote that she was falling harder and harder in love, but it wasn't written under threats. Cameron said he kidnapped the girl, but she later fell in love with him and it was consensual. But still it was taken into account what the girl had to endure, feelings of affection and even love she nurtured in herself, so that every day not to experience the agony of rape. This is a psychological defense mechanism, a perfectly acceptable human reaction to a highly traumatic event. Cameron Hooker was sentenced to 104 years in prison in 2015. Cameron Hooker, 60, applied for parole under California's parole program. He was denied, and there will be no parole hearing on his case for 15 years. After the trial, Colleen Stan was completely free of the addiction she had felt for Cameron Hooker her entire life. She stopped contacting him as well as his wife. She almost immediately went to school to study accounting. After her studies, she got a job, got married, and had a daughter. Colleen Stan is married for the 4th time and is raising her grandson, who is about 7 years old. She is now helping women to recover from similar horrific incidents that have happened to them.